Welcome to the Week 10 lecture. This week we are going to wrap up the class and we're going to discuss briefly the default passive model of decision making, and then we're going to review some items for the synthesis paper that's due at the close of the class. Our topics this week are active versus passive prescriptive models with a special emphasis on defaults. And then we're going to talk briefly about the synthesis paper. We're going to explain what we mean by values, beliefs, and principles, and give you some guidance on how to prepare your paper. Our learning objectives this week are to apply an appropriate decision strategy to an environmental issue, articulate the values, beliefs, and principles that comprise a personal environmental philosophy, and justify an environmental decision outcome using rational, legal, and ethical criteria. As we talked a little bit about last week, the prescriptive models are different than the descriptive models in that prescriptive models provide a prescription or a set of tools and methods that help people make better environmental decisions. These tools and methods are hopefully going to minimize bias and also minimize the use of heuristics, or else are designed to include heuristics but for the benefit of the decision maker. Different types of decisions require different approaches. We've covered quite a few different approaches so far. But again, let me emphasize that the most important decision that a choice architect needs to make is to decide how to decide in a specific context. Select an appropriate prescriptive decision process, whether it's active or passive. And again, last week we introduced the term choice architect, and this is simply anyone who designs the environment in which people make choices, whether it's active choices or passive choices, whether it's structured decision making or simple defaults. We looked at some examples again last week. These are the examples that we used. We're going to just take a quick look at them again. Active decision making is generally appropriate when you have large complex projects such as building a dam, when you have projects that are going to involve a lot of stakeholders such as writing an environmental law, or that could have significant long-term impacts such as developing a community or constructing a waste handling facility, or that also result in significant immediate economic impacts such as installing an industrial manufacturing technology. Passive decision-making examples include these that are listed: choosing organic versus conventionally grown food, etc. They tend to be smaller in scope than the active decisions, and they tend to be relatively straightforward, something that's done on a daily basis and done when we're not paying a whole lot of attention to what's going on. For example, using electricity in the home, that tends to be invisible. Choosing what and when to recycle, it's sort of a mindless choice. Make a commitment. How do we make these commitments? And buying home appliances. These are all examples of decisions that have environmental impacts and that can be affected by implementing some passive decision-making techniques. And this week we want to talk a little bit about defaults. We can view a default as the path of least resistance, and it's suited to passive decision making because of the several biases that we've learned about, status quo bias in particular, and then there's another attachment bias. People tend to be attached to what they have. They like to maintain the status quo, and when a choice is presented, then they will anchor and adjust closest to the default because they like to maintain a balance with the status quo, not losing anything. So from the world of quality, some of you may be familiar with, this is the birth of defaults, which is poka-yoke or mistake proofing, and this has been used for years very successfully, although in recent years we've seen it expand to a number of places, and we can see here that one of the most visible examples of poka-yoke or mistake proofing is the gas cap on all modern cars, which has a line or an attached piece of plastic to the body of the car, so we don't lose our gas cap. In fact, most cars built in the past 5 or 6 years have this, and this is a direct result of changing the default. And the default used to be you would unscrew your cap and put it somewhere, and maybe forget to put it back on or have it fall off or lose it. Now the default is to let it hang there while you fill your tank, and then you can see it. There's an immediate feedback, and then you reinstall the cap, turn it so that it clicks, and you don't lose it or misplace it. There are many examples of defaults such as this that are used. For example, for email newsletters, opt-in versus default opt-out when you sign up for something or you visit a website. When you install software, the majority of software now has the express installation versus custom installation. The express installation is the default. On most printers, unfortunately, single-sided is the default versus double-sided printing. Now, defaults can simplify complex choices. They can offer us a way through a particular complex set of decisions, such as software installation. In fact, some of the latest software is extremely complex, and there's possibly hundreds of decisions you would have to make in order to install it if you wanted to do a custom installation. However, the default makes all these decisions for you so that you can just go ahead and have it installed with the basic configuration. With defaults, we have to realize that when we design a situation that uses a default as a choice, there is a potential for manipulation and coercion. Therefore, transparency becomes very important. We need to provide the decision maker with information as much as necessary so they can perceive that they're making an informed choice and that they're not being manipulated into something that is not going to be in their best interest. The real key question around defaults, and they're just now starting to be used, is what are the appropriate default rules for people who want to make choices that benefit the environment? And this is a question that you will ask yourself and ask other individuals who are involved with you in designing a choice environment. Some areas where we need to apply this concept and develop some default rules are organic versus conventionally grown food, solar versus coal or oil-based electricity, a personal car versus public transportation, cloth versus plastic versus paper grocery bags, and development versus nature preserve. So we still haven't answered to a large degree as a society what are the appropriate default rules for people who want to make choices that benefit the environment. What should be the default? What's interesting, though, is that in terms of choices, especially around environmental choices, entire businesses have been developed based on changing the default rules for consumers. A good example is Whole Foods. When you walk in, the default for buying fruits and vegetables in Whole Foods is organic, and now they're also changing the default to be organic and local. This is part of the local food movement. When you walk into a regular supermarket, such as a Safeway or perhaps a King Soopers or a Fry's or whatever you have in your area, Albertsons or something like this, maybe Wegmans, the default is conventionally grown food. So we see that by changing default choices, we can add value in many different ways, as well as offer decision makers alternatives that have positive environmental impacts. There's 4 basic principles that are used or that should be used when we design a default as part of a set of decision alternatives. And the first is that we want to make life as easy as possible. Make your default so that it simplifies the choice. Make it easy for the decision maker to choose. The second principle is that a default should minimize or eliminate social, economic, and ecological costs. So we look at these 3 sets of of costs and determine a default that would minimize or eliminate them. The third principle is select defaults that you would be willing to defend publicly. Again, this goes back to the perception of the default as being coercive or manipulative. We want to provide some transparency around the decision choice. If the person wants to understand why they're choosing the default, they need to be able to access the relative information that is supporting that particular choice. This also then ties into the last principle, which is respect the right of people to make informed choices. And the way that we do that is we provide them with a non-coercive, non-manipulative set of alternatives that are supported by relevant data and information, and make that data and information accessible. I'd like to shift gears a little bit and talk about the synthesis paper, because this is, well, theoretically and quite possibly the most important assignment you're going to do in this class, because you're going to really bring together your learning. The purpose of this assignment is to enable you to gain insights concerning your personal values and beliefs relative to the environmental issues we've looked at in the class, to solidify your learning from the class, to really bring it together in terms of what's important and what's not important to you, to understand the principles that guide your decisions. Maybe you're using these principles but you're not writing them down, or you're not fully aware of them, and to develop a set of criteria that you can use to make environmental decisions in your personal and professional lives. And so this assignment offers you a takeaway, or a set of takeaways that you can use in your future decision-making activities. The basis of this assignment is informed reflection about your class efforts over the past 10 weeks. And in order to reflect, you need a timeout. Take a timeout, a couple hours, just browse through all of your papers that you wrote so far, your discussion threads, without any particular, perhaps initially, any particular goal. Just read through them, just to become familiar with them. And so put it all in your temporary memory. And when you begin asking yourself some questions, allow the answers to emerge. You don't want to force an answer. You don't have to have a certain value or a certain belief or a certain principle. This is all about you, and so what you bring to it is your understanding of yourself. And so that can't be forced. That has to be allowed to emerge, and the most effective way is to take a time out and review your work in a reflective manner. The concepts underlying this particular paper are that we create our own reality. In other words, we react to our map of reality rather than reality itself. And so our values and our beliefs and our principles are held as internal filters that delete, distort, and generalize the data that's coming to us through our senses: the visual, auditory, kinesthetic, olfactory, and gustatory. So what happens is that these values, beliefs, and principles work as a stained glass window. And they create, or we create in ourselves, an internal representation of the external reality based on how these three elements filter the external data through our senses. Our internal representation for us becomes, for all intents and purposes, our reality. Our reality then generates an emotional state. Remember, we talked about dual processing, affect and logical processing, which then affects us physically, and then in turn, which affects us on our decision processes. These internal representations are the basis of how we are going to go about making these decisions. In other words, our internal map is something that we construct based on what we can believe to be important, what we believe to be true, and how we approach or operate in the world. Our decisions then are founded on an internal representation that was generated as a result of these particular items. But then again, these are distortions or generalizations and deletions of external data. They're not the actual external data itself. And so our decisions are always biased, whether we like it or not. And each person's decision is going to be based on their unique internal representation of reality. And so the internal representation, for all intents and purposes, is their reality. The decisions that will be based on that then will be different. So in order to make more effective decisions, we need to understand our personal values, our personal beliefs, and our personal principles. How are we deleting, distorting, and generalizing the data that we're getting through our senses? And how might this affect our decisions? A belief is a statement of personal truth. And here are some example beliefs. Pollen causes allergies. Success means having a lot of money. This is one from Ben Franklin. Early to bed, early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. These are simply truths that we believe on their face. These are just beliefs that we have about how the world works, what's the nature of reality. Our beliefs reflect different worldviews. For example, if we believe the earth is alive, that's a very different worldview than if we believe the earth is dead matter. Our beliefs also support our values. For example, we might believe that when I recycle, I help build a clean environment. Our value in this case would be having a clean environment. And so the beliefs help to operationalize our values in the world. And these are more sort of functional level statements, truths that we believe, truths that we hold as self-evident. Values, on the other hand, are defined as the worth, usefulness, or importance of a thing, the relative merit or status according to the estimated desirability or utility of a thing. And again, values are personal. Each person has their own set of values. A lot of these come from our families. A lot of these come from society. A lot of these come from the roles that we're playing in our personal and professional lives. And so social psychology plays a large part here in determining how we hold values. There's two kinds of values. Values are intrinsic. In other words, what's desired as an end in itself. There's no justification for it. It just simply is important. And there are instrumental values. What is desired is a means to that end. For this particular class, it's not critical that you understand this distinction, but in moving forward, when you start really assessing your values further, it's important to understand what is intrinsic and what is instrumental. It just makes it clearer in terms of how your values support your principles. Here are some examples from an article called Environmental Values, and these are quite good, and so you may want to use these as a starting point in your paper. There are 3 biospheric values that the authors put into their article. For example, protecting the environment, preserving nature, unity with nature, fitting into nature, respecting the earth, harmony with other species. Altruistic values are the ones that govern our interaction with the world in terms of how compassionate we are. A world at peace, free of war and conflict, social justice, correcting injustice, care for the weak, and then equality, how we view our relationship to others. Are we as equals or as unequals? Conservation or traditional values include honoring parents and elders, showing respect, family security, safety for loved ones, and self-discipline, self-restraint, resistance to temptation. Self-enhancement or egoistic values or self-centered values are authority, the right to lead or command, influential, having an impact on people and events, wealth, material possessions, money. These are the values we hold relative to ourselves rather than relative to others. Openness to change values determines how we move through time. A varied life filled with challenge, novelty, and change, an exciting life, stimulating experiences, curious, interested in everything, exploring equal justice for all, or perhaps a stable life filled with low levels of change. So the the key here in understanding values is that they are ways that we mediate our existence with our world. They determine for us what's important, and they help us to understand why we make the choices that we make, because we choose what is important to us based on our beliefs, based on what we consider to be true about the world. Principles are a further extension. You can see the hierarchy, sort of beliefs, values, and principles. Principles are rule governing one's behavior, and principles are based on values and beliefs. If you can envision a pyramid where the base of the pyramid is beliefs and the middle part is values and the top is principles, all three are connected and all three affect how we make decisions. And so there are a couple of principles around environmental management and environmental decision making that are relevant for this class. You can take a look at them and see if any of these apply in your life, or if you hold them to be a rule that is appropriate for you. The sustainability principle is that decision makers are responsible to develop and maintain the capacity to endure. Polluter pays principle, as is discussed in issue number 1 in your text. Those who produce pollution are responsible for paying for the damage done to humans in the natural environment. The precautionary principle, this is also a part of the it's a basis for the polluter pays principle in Article 1. When an activity increases the risks of harm to the environment or human health, precautionary measures should be taken even if some cause and effect relationships are not fully established scientifically. This is the low risk approach. In other words, if the risks are not, even if the risks are not defined, as long as there's a risk, we should not take an action. The equity principle is that decision makers promote equal opportunities for all to achieve their full potential in a safe and healthy environment. Again, this is treating people as equals versus treating people as members of a hierarchy where some are more deserving than others. The rights principle, decision makers uphold and support the inherent dignity and equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family. This is part of social contracts everywhere. We have in our Constitution life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the final principle, the participation principle. Decision makers seek and facilitate the involvement of those potentially affected by or interested in a decision. And so these principles offer us rules for structuring our decisions, and these are kind of an operating system for choice architects. The synthesis paper that you're going to write will have 5 sections. There's going to be your title page, a very brief introduction. Then you're going to provide a philosophy overview and background. What do you believe to be true about how humans should interact with their natural environment? Why are these items true for you? What values do you hold concerning human-environment interactions? What is most important about these interactions? What principles did you apply to guide your responses to the environmental issues discussed during class? You may choose to, when you write your answers, you can look at some of the values and principles that we've provided in this presentation. However, feel free to go beyond that, do a little bit of research, and perhaps articulate some values and principles and maybe some beliefs that aren't listed. The conclusion is about moving forward. What might be your future approaches to environmental issues, and what might happen if other individuals adopted your values, beliefs, and principles? So this is asking you to look towards the future, how you're going to apply the knowledge that you've gained about yourself, and about how you represent your internal reality, and what are the implications of this for your environmental decision-making activities in the future. Then you're going to have some references. References are required for this paper, so you should be doing some research out there. There's a lot of information available about environmental principles, environmental values, and environmental beliefs, so it should be relatively easy for you to find. If you get stuck, shoot me an email, and we can see what we can do to guide you to the right location. When you're preparing your paper, just follow the steps that are listed here. Review your discussion posts, review your graded papers, and take a look at the issues that are described in the Taking Sides text. Just read through them. And then just ask yourself, well, the first review that you do should just be to bring it into memory. Just become familiar with your body of work that you did for the class. Then, after you're familiar with it, then ask yourself how you might answer each of the following questions. What do you believe to be true about how humans should interact with their natural environment? And then why are these items true? What are your beliefs around human-environment interactions? Well, then again, what values do you hold concerning human environment? What's important for these interactions? What principles did you apply to guide your responses to the environmental issues you learned about? In other words, which of these principles that we discussed did you apply? Do you have any new ones? And how would you define those principles? And then again, looking forward, what might be based on what you understand yourself to be, what might be your future approaches to environmental issues, and what might happen if other people adopted your set of values, beliefs, and principles. So the first part is about understanding your beliefs, what is true for you. The second part's about understanding what your values, what's important for you. And then the third part is about understanding your principles. How are these values and beliefs implemented in rules? And then the final two parts are about moving forward in the future. How would you approach future decision-making situations based on your set of filters? And just a speculation on what might happen if other individuals adopted your particular values, beliefs, and principles. So in conclusion, the defaults simplify the decision process, but they can be perceived as manipulative and coercive. So the goal is to provide adequate transparency and an orientation towards social equity. In other words, fairness, an opportunity for the decision maker to make an informed choice. The synthesis paper that you're going to write, this is your chance to really get some value out of the class. You can solidify your learning, clarify your personal values and beliefs concerning environmental issues, adopt a set of meaningful principles, and to be more prepared for making future environmental decisions in an informed manner. Good luck with your paper. Let me know if you have any questions, and we will see you in the threads.